It's time for a much needed dose of positivity. Because while we all definitely have our gripes with Fire Emblem once in a while, me included, it's also good to remember that this is such an amazing series with so many fun games, mechanics, characters and more. Today, I want to dive into exactly that, the absolute best thing every Fire Emblem game has to offer, spin-offs included. And of course we start with Shadow Dragon, which might make this the perfect moment to mention that I am gonna combine remakes and the original titles into one entry, simply because I think every remake in Fire Emblem so far have been super clear upgrades that also retain basically everything from the original title. That said, Shadow Dragon is a very tricky game for something like this, because although I am always a little baffled how many Fire Emblem staples originate from a game older than me and most of you watching, there is very little in this game that a later title hasn't done better. But I've found something that is admittedly quite niche, but it does kinda surprise me it never returned, save for Mystery of the Emblem of course. I'm talking about the class known as Freelancer, which is exclusive to Zane. This is kinda like a predecessor to both Beast units and Dancers, as it's a shape-shifting class that allows you to take on the form of any unit in your army for the next 3 turns. Now, let me just quickly say that the way it is used in this game isn't perfect, and in its current state, Dancers are the better option, but I still think it's a very cool concept with an interesting twist that sets it apart from Dancers and would allow it to stand beside them with just a few tweaks. For example, not copying the inventory feels kinda harsh and also limits the variety of what you can do with Zane. If it were to return, I'd suggest they take a second look at that. Anyway, is this class literally the best part of Shadow Dragon? No, but at this point in time, the original game and the remake on DS as well are nothing more than pretty standard Fire Emblem experiences that don't really excel in anything specifically. So I figured I'd highlight this feature that is at least completely unique to the Arcania titles. Next up is Gaiden, or rather Shadows of Valentia, because it shouldn't come as a surprise that the remake of 3DS is a huge improvement over the original. And what I'm about to declare the best thing about it is hardly controversial, but it is the popular opinion for a reason: the presentation. The art style of this game is exceptional. I've made an entire video about how the design of characters has changed over time, so I won't spend too long focusing on it here, but the overhauls that everyone involved in this title have received are genuinely among the best in gaming history. The character art is amazing, the writing is great, there are some interesting new characters with Berkut as highlight, and this is the first fully voiced Fire Emblem game, which helps elevate everything so much. In the presentation department, this is a genuine masterpiece. And the fact that this is a remake, so very little of the characters are original creations for it, makes it even more impressive, because that's a lot more difficult to get right. I really hope Hidari is brought back for a future game. We are in dire need of more of his amazing work. Alright, back to Arcania now for Mystery of the Emblem, where we'll also be looking at the remake for DS. Similarly to Shadow Dragon, this is a difficult one, because in essence this is just a solid Fire Emblem game, not an exceptional one. That said, I think the thing this game should be most revered for is bringing the world and characters of Arcania up to the at least then modern standards of Fire Emblem. The few supports and base conversations help us get some more insight into who our units are. The story actually features a surprisingly high amount of world building for the continent of Arcania, and it even brought the forgotten characters from the Arcania saga back and made them true mainline units. Especially that latter one is very much something they didn't have to do. No one would have made a problem out of it if they had left those characters in the dust. So the decision to keep them on board is purely one made out of love for the game. I guess you could argue all of this is nothing too amazing, it's more bringing the story of Arcania up to snuff, but hey, I would still consider that the best part of specifically New Mystery of the Emblem. And I really hope that we don't have to wait too long for Genealogy of the Holy War to receive the same treatment, because it really deserves it. Both NES titles are a bit of outliers within the series as a whole at this point, I feel like. Since they've never been remade, they lack a lot of what we have now come to consider standard for Fire Emblem games. But at the same time, they also have a ton of their own quirks that are completely unique to them. For Genealogy of the Holy War, one thing that was exclusive to it for the longest time was a time skip. Arcania had one, albeit split up in 2 games, same with the Tellius titles, and while Awakening also features a time skip, I wouldn't necessarily call it a huge part of the game. It wasn't until Three Houses that we received another truly impactful time skip confined to one game, a whopping 23 years later. I've always found the way Fire Emblem 4 treats its halfway point to be absolutely amazing. It's such a memorable moment that I don't want to dive too deep into because I don't want to spoil it for those who don't know in case the remake does come, but just take it from me, it's awesome. And while there are a lot of things that Genealogy of the Holy War does really well, don't get me wrong, I've always found its use of the time skip to be something special. Onto Thracia, which also very much just kind of does its own thing, in a way that leads to a generally less successful final product than its predecessor, I would say. That said, it is also these random little things that only Thracia has that makes it worthwhile to play in my opinion. It's not your standard Fire Emblem experience whatsoever. Being able to grow movement like it's any other stat, for example, that's wild. The scrolls are another example of such a weird item with unique effects that we have never seen since. Furthermore, the way you are basically forced to steal and capture enemies in order to take their items simply because you basically get no money in this game is not just a very unique way of playing, but also suits the story and helps build the feeling that you're truly fighting against the odds. Many Fire Emblem games say you are, but Thracia actually makes you feel it firsthand. So yeah, point being, Thracia is not the greatest Fire Emblem has ever been, but it is a super unique experience, which is probably its biggest selling point. Onto the Binding Blade, which I found another kinda tricky one. In a certain way, this game is kind of a Shadow Dragon 2.0, in the way that it is essentially the blueprint of what modern Fire Emblem games are like. In essence, it has all the same elements as say Awakening or Three Houses, and it is the first game that can say that, but many elements are still a little basic. Supports are of course the prime example. They're introduced in Binding Blade, but the system is rough to say the least. But this is a positive video, so let's instead talk about what I would consider its biggest strength, the sprite work. Yeah, this is a compliment that you can give to Blazing Blade or Sacred Stones as well, and they also look lovely, but Binding Blade is the one that started this style and immediately nailed it on the first try. Add the critical hit animations to the mix and you get another Fire Emblem with great presentation, from a time where it really wasn't that easy to be a graphically impressive game. Next is the Blazing Blade, where we're of course not gonna talk about the presentation again. I guess technically the best thing about this game is that it brought Fire Emblem to the West and made it a worldwide series, setting off a butterfly effect that has ended with me talking to you about this game today, but I want to instead put the spotlight on another meta aspect of this game, a design decision. What I've always found extremely cool about it, especially nowadays when I've also played Binding Blade, is that they made the call to make this a prequel. Think about it. Every other Fire Emblem game set in the same region as the one that came before has always been a sequel, and that makes sense. It's what your mind immediately goes to when thinking of coming up with the next title. Blazing Blade doesn't. It shows you how a leap was before the events of Binding Blade, and while I doubt any one of us have actually experienced this, I can imagine how crazy it must have felt for Japanese fans at the time to find out the main lords of Blazing Blade are the two parents from Binding Blade. It's such a cool concept that really makes the two Elite games a very unique duology of games, even if I believe Blazing Blade could have done more with the concept of being a prequel, although that is undoubtedly partly the result from the aforementioned decision to make this the first Fire Emblem game we got in the West. We continue on the GBA with Sacred Stones, which I only just realized is the only completely self-contained Fire Emblem in like almost the entire series. Literally every other game is at least linked to either another title entirely or has several stories or paths within it that could be released as their own standalone titles if Intelligent Systems had continued with the Pokemon-esque strategy from Fates. But anyway, while I do think that makes this game very noteworthy by itself, and probably one of the best games to recommend to newcomers, I wouldn't necessarily call it the best thing about the game. For that, I want to take a look at a deeper mechanic, the class change system. This might be unpopular, although I do think it's getting more steam in recent times, but I feel like Sacred Stones has the perfect balance of freedom and linearity for classes ever. As we will see for later titles, I do greatly enjoy the freedom Fire Emblem gives you nowadays when constructing your units, and there are elements of it that I would want to be kept, like skills for example, but when it comes to raw classes, I've always liked a bit of a standard path personally. I don't know, maybe I'm basic, but I just like keeping characters near the class path it feels like they were meant to be. So for me, Sacred Stones offers the perfect solution, the best of both worlds. Yes, you get freedom to make your own choices and shape your units, but you can turn your experienced paladin into a budding mage. No clue how likely it actually is, but I would love for this system to be given another shot in future games. Perhaps expanding the options beyond 2, just to give a tad more freedom for those that prefer that game style. On to the GameCube, where we find 2 stellar titles. We're gonna start with Path of Radiance, of course, the biggest quality of which is its story as far as I'm concerned. Not exactly an unpopular opinion, but that's for good reason, since this game, but both Thalia's titles really, do something Fire Emblem has not always succeeded at. Creating a plot that is mature and covers serious and even realistic tones without it all falling a tad flat due to the inherently campiness of Fire Emblem. Probably the best example of what I mean by that is the backstory of Bernadetta. If you were to write it out, you would end up with an extremely tragic tale that is unfortunately still very real nowadays even, but when you look at how it is presented in game, it's all treated a tad too unserious to really elevate that written backstory. And that is in Three Houses of all games, one of the more serious titles to begin with. But Path of Radiance doesn't fall into that trap. It writes a great story and sticks the landing through the game itself as well. I don't want to dive too deep into it, since I feel like there's still a decent contingent of people who have never played these games, and I really wouldn't want to spoil the experience of what truly is one of the best Fire Emblem games, especially when taking the both Thalia's games together. And speaking of the devil, we're moving on to Radiant Dawn, where really the same thing applies, but let's focus on something else instead, just for fun. I adore the constant switching of the themes this game has. Not only does it make almost every character feel like a core part of your army, it's also a direct cause of why the story here works so well, since it allows for a tremendously large scope. It's a level of ambition that you don't see every day, and especially at the time, when Fire Emblem was really a lot more formulaic than it is now, this was a huge departure, and best of all, it works wonders. I feel like the lower sales of this game may have caused Intelligent Systems to not try it again, but this too is something I would love to see again in the future. I feel like it would have suited a game like Fates or Three Houses really well. Back to the handhelds now, where we land at Awakening. If Shadow Dragon is Fire Emblem 1.0 and Binding Blade is 2.0, Awakening is without a doubt 3.0. Once again, this is a very well-rounded Fire Emblem experience, which takes almost everything that made the previous game so amazing and adds a ton of additional stuff in all the right places. And yeah, it is easily broken, and yeah, it maybe gives the player a bit too much freedom, but there is so much stuff to try and do and experiment with that you can play this game until the end of time and still enjoy it. Because that is in my opinion the best thing about Awakening, how replayable it is. Sure, there are very few Fire Emblem games that aren't super replayable, but Awakening is in a league of its own. One thing that hurts the older titles is that their characters aren't fleshed out enough, so even if you end up using board instead of court on your third playthrough, it doesn't change a whole lot. With Awakening, that has a massive effect on the kind of support you get, as well as how your child units end up looking. And then I haven't even mentioned that you can just change up a unit's class on the fly if you understandably insist on using Cordelia again, but don't want to keep her as a Pegasus Knight. And I know I said for Sacred Stones that I prefer a more linear class system, and I do, but I can't deny it makes for an immensely replayable experience. On to Fates, which is a divisive title, and that's putting a positive spin on it. That said, I feel like even this game's biggest haters, which I am not one of FYI, would agree that the map design in this game is stellar. Combined over the 3 paths, there are so many unique mechanics, completion goals, little side missions, it's amazing. Sure, they're not all slam dunks, see my video on the worst chapter in every Fire Emblem game, but the average quality is extremely high. And what's arguably even more impressive is that there's surprisingly little overlap in map designs between Conquest and Birthright, which is something that is rightly often brought up criticism of Three Houses and its multiple paths. So while I do agree that the units you use on them might not be the greatest characters, going through the greatest plot, the design of the maps themselves in Fates is of a really high quality. Next up, we have a slew of spin-offs to tackle, starting with Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Now, I will straight up admit I am not the perfect person to talk about this. I have played the game, although it's been a while, but mostly I am not a huge fan of the style of RPG that Shin Megami Tensei is. I like Persona, but mostly because of the things it does differently from SMT, and those features are only marginally a part of Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Furthermore, as I mentioned in my video about the worst thing in every Fire Emblem game, I feel like this game is a bit disappointing from a Fire Emblem standpoint. It doesn't do as much with it as I would have liked. That said, what I did appreciate about it is how the game doesn't take itself too seriously. It's super colorful, bright and weird, and it knows it. It doesn't attempt to be some deep or dark story, it's just goofy and fun. And I feel like that's something I've come to appreciate more following Engage, which has a similar design philosophy in its presentation, but takes its story surprisingly seriously, which causes that weird mix of serious tones and campiness we talked about earlier. The next spin-off to launch was Fire Emblem Heroes, and easily the best part of this game is how much new artwork and voice lines it has given us for characters that were all but forgotten. Sure, the extra Xander and Lucina art and quotes are cool and all, but giving characters from the SNES or GBA new voices and faces is where Heroes truly shines. And yes, not every hero is a hit, but with as much content and representation from all over the series as in this game, that was inevitable. I also want to give compliments to the original story of Heroes. Though it is not even remotely similar anymore to what it was when it just started, there have been some very interesting story beats scattered all throughout the many books. I've been surprised by that on several occasions. But that's more of a shout out. Truly the best thing about the app is the huge amount of fire redesigns. And then we have another crossover title, Fire Emblem Warriors, which is not as good as I feel like it could be, and I would love to see the Warriors team give this another shot, but there is one thing this game did very well compared to the much more popular fellow crossover Heroes: supports. Sure, they're not canon or anything, but who cares, man? We have support conversations here between Marv and Lucina, Chrom and Lynn, Celica and Corrin, and much more. It's awesome. Now of course you can just watch these all on YouTube after you've watched this video. You don't need to actually buy and play the game for it, but hey, it's still something that makes me happy Fire Emblem Warriors exists, even if it is admittedly a forgettable title otherwise. We stick on the Switch for the next mainline title, a little known game by the name of Three Houses. This is another very difficult one, and not because the game is particularly well rounded, but more because I think there are a bunch of things this game does really well, like best of all time level well. I've never made a list of my favorite games of all time, but I don't need to know Three Houses is a candidate for the top spot. I love this game. If I had to pick one thing to call the absolute best though, I would say it's the world building. Fodlan's lore and history are so incredibly in-depth. I have literally found out new stuff about it that I didn't know while working on this channel. That's how much there is to uncover and learn here. It goes so much deeper than what playing one of the game's paths would suggest, and that's incredibly impressive. It's another element that I really hope we see again in the future. And if the price to pay is more Edelgard-like discourse, then that is a sacrifice I'm willing to make. A part of why the story of Fodlan is so immense is because a game released a few years later that actually expanded it even more, being Three Hopes. Now, a lot of what this game does right, it shares with Three Houses, so the pitfall of just repeating myself is very easily made here, so I'm instead gonna focus on something that is unique to Three Hopes. Now, this may sound like a very weird compliment, but I honestly believe it's the biggest one you can bestow upon a spin-off. This game feels like a mainline Fire Emblem game. This is a core series game in everything but the gameplay of the chapters. That's not a minor thing, obviously, but I've never played a spin-off of a series that managed to hit the strides of the core thing so well as Three Hopes. If you've never played it, I would really recommend you give it a shot, provided you want to see more of Fodlan and its fantastic cast of characters, of course. Another good thing about this game, and the first Warriors too, is that you can usually find them for pretty decent prices for Nintendo games, so consider keeping an eye out for Three Hopes. And finally, we have Engage. In my opinion, Engage is a great game in its own right, but compared to its main series predecessor, it does feel like a bit of a step back. That said, there is still a ton to love about this game. The gameplay is really good, it has that old school replayability factor that was kinda lost with Three Houses, and I think it succeeded very well at its concept of being a celebratory title. Sure, the whole Alere is the Fire Emblem thing was a little corny, but also in a cute way, I think. It's charming, I would say. Engage can be really charming if it wants to be. That said, what I would consider the absolute best thing about this game are the graphics. I don't mean art style like what I picked for Echoes and the Binding Blade, because I am not the biggest fan of the art design of this game. That said, the graphics themselves are gorgeous. Engage is a very beautiful game to look at on a system that is not exactly a powerhouse. Sure, I would have preferred if what was shown was designed a little differently here and there, but this is one element where I feel like no game in the series can come close to Engage. It bodes very well for the future too, going into the Switch successor, where we will hopefully get a new game with an even higher level of graphical fidelity. And then I guess I need to find a new best thing for Engage. But until then, how about you share your favorite things about the games in the comments below? I'm especially interested in hearing about like your favorite little niche things about a game that most folks may not even consider. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.